The guest of honor and special guest speaker, His Eminence Cardinal Peter Kojo Appiah-Texin, the Chairman of the University Council, Dr. Kofi Kunedu, the clergy, members of parliament present, ministers of state, Nemen, Namen, Nananum, leaders of professional bodies and associations, members of convocation, alumni of this great university, members of the media, my dear students, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you warmly to the 2022 Annual Leadership Lecture Series at the University of Professional Studies, Accra. I would like to begin by expressing my gratitude to His Eminence, Cardinal Peter Kojo Appiah-Texin, Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, Prefect Emeritus of the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, Archbishop Emeritus of Cape Coast here in Ghana, a long title, for accepting our invitation to be the special guest speaker. A warm welcome to all other distinguished dignitaries here in your numbers. This annual leadership lecture was established in 2017 as a platform for national and global discussion about issues and challenges that cut across humanity. Previous honored guest speakers have led this lecture series by providing insights into leadership, the conflicting picture of emerging global issues, trends, national challenges, and worldwide opportunities. The leadership lecture provides an intellectual platform where distinguished individuals critically examine, deliberate, and discuss leading critical global and national issues and proffer solutions. With the ongoing global issues that have impacted us all, from the COVID-19 pandemic to the Russian war on Ukraine, energy and environmental security, conflict and poverty, and global imbalances, among others, we believe it is a critical time to host a lecture that highlights quality leadership for our collective humanity and connectedness, as well as our purpose on earth that contributes to the collective. His Eminence joins other great men of our land like His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chambers, who delivered the inaugural UPSA leadership lecture, His Excellency President John Agyekum Kufuor, and His Majesty Otumfuo Osei Tutu II, who delivered the second and third lectures respectively as an alumnus of this exemplar initiative. Great lessons and insights for reflection were the outcomes of the first three lectures, and we look forward to this lecture by His Eminence. Ladies and gentlemen, the choice of our topic for today's lecture by His Eminence, Tragedy of the Common, Leadership for the Common Good, is as relevant as it is timely for our socio-political and economic enlightenment, especially under the circumstances of the current realities the world finds itself. I'm certain that his topic is extremely relevant and appropriate for our times. At no time in global history has there been greater conflict between individual and collective rationality. Since the pandemic, many nations have confronted conflicts, anxiety, uncertainty, and citizens have not been spared. We are still in unpredictable times, and in times like this, the yearning for stability and the importance of good leadership is critical. We are anxious to listen with rapt attention to His Eminence and internalize the nuggets of wisdom that he will share with us today. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for accepting our invitation to this lecture, which promises to be memorable and thought-provoking. On behalf of the Council, management, and the entire university community, I warmly welcome you and I wish you a wonderful time in the company of His Eminence. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Today is a day about protocols, so permit me to properly introduce former Archbishop of West Africa, the Most Reverend Justice Ofei Akrofi, and he's also a member of the Council of State. And I also didn't properly introduce Right Reverend Dr. George Nikwe. He's a South African Bishop of Accra. Thank you again, Vice Chancellor. Before I introduce today's honored guest, we'd like to hear a musical selection from the UPSA choir. Today and ought to be considered. Congratulations. Before I introduce the guest speaker, permit me to mention some of our honored guests here with us. I'd like to start with the Council Chairman, Dr. Kofi Ohene-Konadu, Council members Mark Bedu Abuaji and Mr. Francis Dadzi. We also have Mr. Peter Jeke Abuaji with us, His Excellency Ambassador Edward Boateng, State Interest and Governance Authority, Ernest Addo, who is the editor of the New Crusading Guide. We also have Honorable Justina Marigold Asan, Central Regional Minister. We also have Mr. Kobna Taylor. He's the Director in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Regional Integration. Mr. William Uredu, Managing Director of Cal Bank. The Chief Director of the Ministry of Information, Mamle Andrews. Kofi Finn with Petra. The Chairman of the National Peace Council is also with us. The MD of Unilever PLC, George Owusu-Ansah, the Vice Chancellor, Accra Technical University, Mr. Richard Ansong, Director and Partner of the Assurance Line of Service, PwC, Dr. Thomas Ba, Director of Save the Nation site, Henry Shirazu Al-Hassan, who is with the Ghana Export-Import Bank, Mrs. Cynthia Sari Bediako, she's the Chief Director of the Ministry of Environmental Science, Technology and Innovation. And our own neighbor, Very Reverend Professor J. Kwabna Asamoah Jedu, Trinity Theological Seminary. Thank you. It is my honor today to introduce today's honored guest speaker, Cardinal Peter Kojo Appiah Turkson, Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences at the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, Prefect Emeritus of the Dicastery for Promotion Integral Human Development, Archbishop Emeritus of Cape Coast, Ghana. He was born October 11, 1948 at Nsuta Wassel in Ghana. He attended St. Teresa's Seminary in Amisano and St. Peter's Regional Seminary in Pedu. Both of these occurred between 1962 and 1971. On July 20, 1975, he was ordained for the Archdiocese of Cape Coast. He continued his studies in Rome at the Pontifical Biblical Institute, earning a license in sacred scripture. Then he began working on his doctoral thesis. He holds a master's degree in theology and divinity from the St. Anthony-on-Hudson Franciscan Seminary in New York. From 1976 to 77 and 1980 to 81, he served as a staff member of St. Teresa's Seminary. From 81 to 87, he was a staff member of St. Peter's Ceremony. He was acting chaplain and lecturer at the University of Cape Coast for 2 years between 1984 and 1986, and visiting lecturer at the Catholic Major Seminary at Ayamina, Ivory Coast from 1983 to 1986. And he has also been a chancellor of the Catholic University College of Ghana since 2003. On October 6, 1992, he was appointed Metropolitan Archbishop of Cape Coast and received episcopal ordination on 27 March 1993. He served as president of the Ghana Catholic Bishops' Conference. He's also been a member of the Governing Council of the University of Ghana, Legon, and of the Board of Directors of the Central Regional Development Commission. He has served as treasurer of the Symposium of Episcopal Conferences of Africa and Madagascar, and as vice president of the Association of Episcopal Conferences of Anglophone West Africa. He has also served as president of the Regional Episcopal Conference of West Africa. He was also chairman of the Ghana Chapter of Conference for Religions and Peace and the Ghana National Peace Council. On October 24, 2009, he was nominated president of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. And on September 24, 2013, he was confirmed by Pope Francis as president of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. He has been awarded numerous honorary degrees and speaks 6 languages: Fanti, English, French, Italian, German, and Hebrew. He participated in the conclave of April 2005, which elected Pope Benedict, in the conclave of March 2013, which elected Pope Francis. On 31st August 2016, Cardinal Turkson was appointed prefect of the new Department for the Service of Integral Human Development, instituted by the Holy Father Francis with his apostolic letter in the form of a mutu proprio, Onomamo Progressionem, given in Rome at St. Peter's on August 17, 2016, to begin January 1st, 2017. And on March 8, 2018, the Holy Father Francis appointed Cardinal as a member of the Pre-Synodal Council of the Special Assembly of the Synod of Bishops for the Pan-Amazon region. On October 4, 2022, the Holy Father Francis appointed Cardinal Turkson Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. Invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, I give you our honored speaker, His Eminence, Cardinal Peter Kojo Appiah Turkson.
Unless you want to exit, you want to sit down. I was just telling the registrar that I hope I can do well with all the names and everybody that he's done. But Chair of the University Council, Vice Chancellor, Pro Vice Chancellor, Registrar, my Lord Bishops, all of you distinguished traditional leaders, members of Parliament, members of state, distinguished members of the academia, and members of staff of this great university, and all of you dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. I greet all of you very warmly and do commend this session and everything else that would follow to God's own blessing and care. Before I start saying whatever you want me to say, I've been invited to address. I'll just introduce some small correction to the topic so it makes sense and so that you're able to connect with me. The topic should read the tragedy of the commons, not the tragic commons. The tragedy of the commons and leadership for common good. And so, my dear friends, with immense gratitude, sentiments of gratitude to the Vice Chancellor, Chairman of Council, and the board of this university for this invitation extended to me to be here to share some thoughts with you about leadership. And with great, again, similar sentiments of gratitude to all of you for gathering here, for having left everything that you could be doing on this beautiful Wednesday morning to come here to listen to a mind speaking. You know mind speaking? That's how you call anybody who was born in a mining town. You call him mind speaking. And since I was born in Nsuto Woso near Takwa, I'm a mind speaking. So to gather to listen to a mind speaking is interesting. So, my dear friends, there is a literary genre, a way of using and writing language that presents hypothetical situation out of which we can draw some lessons of life. Such literary genres that present such hypothetical situations are sometimes referred to as parables, and the Bible does a lot of them. But it's not only the Bible that does parables or such hypothetical situations. You do have them also in civic life and also in the world of science. This morning I'd like to discuss one such parable, one such hypothetical presentation of a situation with you under the topic or the title, The Tragedy of the Commons, and seek to draw some lessons out of this parable or hypothetical situation and apply them to leadership and how they can also, from their lessons, help us appreciate and understand leadership that can serve the common good. And so, the Industrial Revolution, which began in Britain in 1760, had spread into the rest of Europe and North America by the middle of the subsequent century, between 1820 and 1840. The accompanying agrarian revolution had put an end to the feudal system of Europe at that time and was beginning to adjust to the Industrial Revolution, the euphoria of the discovery and application of technology and machines, and the industrialization of several processes of making new things. But there's one small remnant of the agrarian culture which remained. And that is the establishment and the presence of what we call the commons. The commons is whenever a piece of property is declared as open access area to a group of people who are normally landless, they didn't have any land, but who are given a piece of property that they can access so that they can take care of their own livelihood, fashion their social security, and continue to make their lives work. Commons are very popular, or were very popular in Europe at the beginning of the century, and continue to exist in several forms of late. It was a case of a shared resource which is co-owned, co-organized, and administered by its users and as stakeholder of communities, well organized to manage the existence of the property for their well-being. It could be a thing. It could be an activity, but it could also be a space or some resource which is managed, or sometimes the combination of all of these, which are managed and are meant to serve the common good of the community or the group. It involved the pooling together or the mutualization of the resources whereby individuals exchange with the totality in an ecosystem who help satisfy the need of all. The commons then evolved from a pre-capitalist system of natural resource management to later on, under the Industrial Revolution, become something a little bit more complex and complicated, adopting several forms as the Industrial Revolution and the upsurge of capitalism also required. So several welfare states began with some such commons. And as time went on, some of these commons transformed or metamorphosed into confraternities or solidarity groups with the single objective of ensuring the security and the mutual benefit of all of those who were members of the common. Then, somebody had the idea of looking at, but what happens when the regulated system fails? And this is what happened in 1833 when an economist by name William Foster Lloyd published a small leaflet in which he studied a case of a common where the regulation doesn't function. And then his conclusion was that when the regulation does not function in a common, it leads to the collapse of the system itself. The hypothetical case of a land that Lloyd was studying was a situation of cattle herders who shared a common parcel of land on which they were each entitled to breed their cattle. There was an agreement about how many cattle each member or each family could have. But if a herder put more than his allotted portion of cattle on the ground because he wanted some more benefit or because he claimed he had a right to do it, then chances are that the grazing field would not suffice for all of them. And if other members of the common would adopt the say their cows on the property, then it will simply lead to overgrazing and then the collapse of the common. So this is what happened. And when the economist Lloyd came out with this story, he just wanted to prove a very simple fact. And the fact was how economic benefits and the abuse of rights could lead to the destruction of a noble institution. Economic benefit insistent on rights leading to the collapse of a system that supports the life structure of a whole group. These days, there is still one common that exists which is talked about a lot. It is the so-called Boston Common. In downtown Boston today, you have a 50-acre piece of land that still maintains the name Common, so-called Boston Common. But the origin of Boston Common was very similar. It was a land of an English settler who owned 50 acres of land and sold 44 acres to the governor, who settled on this land the Puritans, and then later on had a system where each family could bring 70 animals to breed on the land. And when again, as before in the case of Lloyd, people exceeded the numbers granted to them, there was overgrazing and there was a collapse of the system. And so, not an economist, this time an ecologist, who in the interest of pushing for the sustainability or sustainable development of the land, revisited the idea of the economist Lloyd and wrote about the title of our talk this morning, The Tragedy of the Commons. Garrett Hardin wanted with a small article to simply say that the collapse of any piece of property which is meant to sustain and support the existence of a group of people, uncontrolled and unregulated, can lead to situations which will make everything fail for the group. And this article began to make the rounds. Garrett, when he wrote this article, wanted, as I said, to make a case for sustainable development and considered how inordinate exploitation of natural resources could lead to the depletion of what we have. And he went to the point of applying this even to human population, and came out with a theory that the earth, with its limited resources, can just not handle just any growth of human population. For this, Garrett was later on attacked and even called an eugenicist for wanting to promote a selective breeding of humankind. But that wasn't the central point of Garrett Hardin. Garrett wanted to demonstrate that a piece of limited facility, which is used without any controls and any law, would at the end of the day not be able to serve the people and the communities that the property was destined to serve. So this was the story of the tragedy of the commons. And it's a tragedy because pieces of property set out. But when the users of the property yielded to something that was within them and increased their own exploitation of the property, the resource failed all of them. And not only did the resource fail them, but those who increased their access to the property for gain ended up cheating on those who tried to be altruistic and not to increase their demands on the property. So Garrett then says this: therein is the tragedy. Each person is locked into a system that compels him to increase his animals without limit. In a world, however, that is limited. ruin is the destination towards which all men rush, each pursuing his own best interest in a society that believes in the freedom of the commons. So when each dependent of the common insists on his rights and his right to increase his own benefits, the risk is that the common does not succeed or is not able to respond to the needs expected of it. And from this small experience of the tragedy of the commons, when people insist on their rights and increase the exploitation of a limited facility, then that facility fails all who depend on it. And there are a few lessons to draw from this tragedy of the commons. As we have observed already, Garrett lamented the collapse of the commons for ecological reasons. But it is possible already now to describe what the tragedy consisted in. And it is simply this. At the heart of the tragedy was greed. Simply greed. Greed prevented a common resource, a common endowment, from fulfilling its purpose, namely from serving the common good or the common need of all who depended on the property. They all will eventually be depleted if everybody in greed extracted from the property more than the property can yield or give. So the problem of then there is the problem then of underinvestment. There are those who gain more from the property, but then who has to plant the other grass for the new year coming up, and who has to invest in the sustainability of the product. There arises therefore the problem of underinvestment. Underinvestment comes up when those left behind cannot sustain the property and therefore cannot keep it sustainable. The tragedy of the commons then becomes a conflict for resources between individual interests and the common good. And a popular common dilemma is a social dilemma in which people's short-term and sometimes selfish interests are at odds with the long-term interest and the vision of the common. So clearly then, my dear friends, the tragedy of the commons is an economics problem in which every individual has an incentive to consume a resource, but at the expense of every other individual and with no way to exclude anyone from consuming. The ensuing social and political problem is either that each individual is incentivized to act in a way that would ultimately be harmful to the common, or that a higher authority simply needs to step in, take control of the commons, and begin to administer it in the end by way of helping the commons meet their needs. Accordingly, one thing that is clear for Garrick is the use of commons. One cannot rely on conscience, because he says that people do not listen to their conscience in such situations as a means of policing their use of the commons, because this favors selfish individuals over those who are more altruistic, and this is really the tragedy. And the reason for me to complement this thing is this. It is true what Garrett says. When there's a limited resource available to us, and a group of us depending on it, and some decided to exploit or extract more from the property, then chances are that the property cannot succeed in fulfilling the needs that it was designed to fulfill. But when Garrett goes one step further and refers to this situation as a tragedy, then for me there is something else that he's saying that he does not explore. To call anything tragedy is to use a word that invites us to recognize the core and the reason for the problem. Tragedy is derived from a Greek word, tragodia, and tragodia in ancient Greece was the name of a theatrical performance. If any of this is not clear to you and you have read the book of Macbeth before, we're talking about that. It's a theatrical performance where a flaw in somebody's character constitutes his ruin, despite his noble intentions and the nobility of his position. That a flaw within somebody leads to the ruin of that person, despite his noble intentions and noble character and noble disposition and everything. That is what the Greeks used to celebrate in theater and call the tragedy. So tragedy is when a noble person with very noble intentions, but has within himself a flaw. And that flaw sometimes they call the hubris, or normally is the thing of pride or arrogance. In this case, Garrett says selfishness would cause the ruin of a very noble enterprise and a noble project. So deciding to talk about the tragedy of commons is precisely that. Living in a country like ours, and several others living in a world like ours, why should we talk about ecological crisis? Why should we talk about the disappearance of snow from Mount Kilimanjaro? Why should we talk about the fact that the River Pra is now reduced to a puddle and no fish lives anymore in the river? And so why should we be talking about all the environmental damages? Noble projects handled by noble people who fail to recognize their ruin, their flaw within them, leads ultimately to the ruin of such noble projects. So that is what the tragedy of the commons is about. It's about a project about fulfilling the needs of all of us, if you want, ensuring our social security, keeping us close to our livelihood, and ensuring that we have what it takes to maintain and to sustain our lives. Just that we forget that this is managed by people who may have flaws within them, and yielding to those flaws, sometimes the nobility of the project doesn't work and it collapses, and this is the tragedy of the commons. So this is what I wanted to discuss with you this morning, talking about the tragedy of the commons and look at some of the lessons that come from it, and from that see whether this can provide some ingredients for restructuring our vision of leadership and see how we can best position them to serve our common needs. So analogies exist to this piece of property called commons, managed by people who then, yielding to selfish needs and personal individual interests, lead it into a collapse, causing a lot of negative externalities for those who did not cause any such thing. This is UPS, right? So here you do business studies. So you understand externalities, when they are positive and when they are negative. In a situation of a tragedy of the commons, those who try to play fair suffer negative externalities. You bring to them damages that they didn't plan with and they didn't reckon with, but which they have to bear because others have to make gains. So that's what we're looking at. And in that sense, there are a lot of analogies like this in the world. I've mentioned some already. We're now dealing with climate crisis. Pretty soon we'll be gathered in Egypt. COP27 to deal with the climate crisis again and see how we can listen to this. It began in 2015 in Paris, where I had the task of representing the Vatican in the negotiation there for COP25 by the Accord. We've been doing this for every year till we're now heading for COP27. And if you did follow that of last year in Glasgow, you saw the British moderator of the event on the last day shed tears before the camera because he could not succeed in attaining the deal that he wanted to. Countries which mine coal were not ready to give up their coal mines. India leading them and saying that it was time for them to develop their industries, and so on camera he shed tears that he could not attain his objectives. But the climate crisis is still with us. And what we want to do with it is sit with us. Here, I suppose, because we're in the tropics, it doesn't make much sense to talk about temperature increase, because we say we are in the tropics already. But there is indeed temperature increase. And if you go along the coast, you see all the coconut trees falling into the sea, because the sea rise is on us. So we're suffering the impact of it. We're not like any of the Pacific islands where the island is going on the water, or the highest point of the island is only 1 meter above sea level. We do have a lot of land mass, but the coastline betrays the fact that there's still something happening. So that is the climate. In India, most of the year you don't see the top of Mount Everest because of smog, because of polluted skies. Same thing happens in China every now and then. And here, because of gold mining in our rivers are being reduced to a puddle. Go to the rivers that feed into the Pra, and it's all puddles. And Cobra is not a flowing river anymore because of search for gold. You know, there's one thing that is being talked about, because a month ago I was in Sweden, and there's a group intending to take to the United Nations a document that they call the ecocide law. They're trying to get the United Nations to support the promulgation of a law that would enable people to prosecute people who cause or who kill, as it were, the environment. If such a law would pass, Ghana could be prosecuted for killing a lot of natural resources. But we leave that law to the United Nations and what they will do with it. But the ecocide law is on, and is being promoted, and that is in the interest of people who think that they need to protect the environment from abusive treatment. But that's again the tragedy of the commons. When we talk about it, sometimes we say that, what kind of earth do we want to leave to our children and those who come after us? We receive the earth as a garden. That's how God created it. But we don't want to leave a desert for those who come after us. But that's a decision again that we need to take. So this is the sense of tragedy. To call anything tragedy means you say at the same time that there's a flaw within the human person which causes the ruin of whatever you're dealing with. So the tragic of the commons is simply to draw attention to this. Commons were meant to ensure the security of people. But again, because of flaws within us, self-interest, personal interest gain and all of that, commons do not work. And analogies of those exist. They exist in the world, they exist in countries, and they exist in different several situations. So, all of this being the case, the title of this lecture is Leadership. So what to do? When Garrett wrote his book about the tragedy of the commons, they proposed 3 solutions for dealing with it. Entrust the management of the commons in more capable hands. So provide new leadership for the commons. Another solution was privatize the commons. Have a more capable, powerful group take care of the commons to manage the commons. And the third one was encourage the group themselves to form some decent cooperatives that can take charge of the commons. This one, we want to talk about the first option, providing leadership for the commons. And when we talk about providing leadership for the commons, then I necessarily need to think about what that leadership is. So it means, for example, we're talking about having human beings, and they need to understand them when they lead and when they are led. Human beings when they govern and when they are governed. Human beings are the different side of the bar. Do they function differently? Or is it the case that at a certain point flaws leave their hearts and they do not operate or function anymore under these flaws that cause hybrid? That is what we want to talk about. And this probably should make several of you recognize that it is a recognition of this, that leadership is always to do something that is very challenging and tough task, that in the past, every form of leadership or kinship was anointed. Anointing was a process of appropriating or approximating somebody to the divine, because the rule of people was considered to be a divine function. So whenever they constitute anybody to be king or ruler or whatever, in antiquity, they thought that the thing to do was to make him divine or godlike or whatever, and they did that by anointing. That was simply to impress upon the candidate being anointed that the task before him or her is a tough, almost a divine-like task. That doesn't happen a lot these days, but that does not take away from us the challenge of needing to recognize what it is that we are addressing. So, two basic questions. What is the human person when he leads, and what is the human person when he is led? What is the human person when he governs, and the human person when he is governed? Does something change within them? Or is just a nomenclature or title that is given and which doesn't mean a lot? What I'd like to suggest is that from my own small office, a lot of which the registrar talked about, we've battled with this for a while, and we decided, we formulated a series of principles with which we have met CEO of mining companies and tried to share this with about leadership. We've met CEO of oil and gas companies, Exxon Mobil, BP, F Total, CEO of this company, just to discuss leadership with them, as well as CEOs of even confectionaries, sweet making factories. And when they come in conversation, we just try to share with them certain basic principles. Basic principles because for us we think that the thing to understand is first understand who and what the human person is. And so any exercise of leadership must depart and start from a clear and solid understanding of the reality you're dealing with. What is man, or what is woman, or what is the human person? On account of that, we say first and foremost, the human person is a being with dignity. Dignity which is not conferred by anybody. Dignity that people are born with. And every human person has this dignity. And when you call somebody a person, it's because you want to affirm this dignity that everyone has. And dignity is not something that the government confers on an individual, and no world institution is in a position to confer dignity on any person. It's something that we're born with as persons. What the government does is to facilitate their development and the realization of what we have. What we're born with, its realization and its growth and development is what? External structures like governance and all of that should help us attain. So this is dignity. And then dignity is also of a character. It's something that one person does not have more dignity than another person. This is the sense that is conveyed when sometimes you talk about humanity as a human family. When you talk about a human family and suggest that all of us gathered are brothers and sisters, you making at the same time the affirmation of the common dignity of all people. For example, when you talk about people being brothers and sisters, here in Ghana we don't speak Greek. But if you were to follow any of these guys into whatever, the Greeks call a brother and a sister Adelphos or Adelphe. And what does that mean? We're from the same womb. And with that, what they're saying is that it's not possible that two people come from the same womb and one has more dignity than the other. It's impossible. So referring to people as brothers and sisters is to make that affirmation. There's no way that any one person has more dignity than the other. All men, all people, men and women, have the same dignity. And this dignity is something that we cherish and we hold together. So besides having our dignity, which makes us persons, we also live as relational beings in relationship with one another. If you want, if you are a believer, we're in relation with God whom we believe created us. Then we're in relationship with one another with whom we live in society. And then we're in relationship also with creation, the earth or nature, which supports our lives. So we are relational beings. And this brings up one of the crucial subject matter. Being relational beings who live in relationship, the word that comes out of this is justice. What does justice mean? Before we refer to a court of law or anything, justice simply basically means respect for the demands of the relationship in which we live. When we respect the demands of the relationship in which we live, that's our justice. When we disregard the demands of the relationship in which we live, that's our injustice. It's a very simple concept, but that's also something we struggle with. The demands of the relationship. Father and his children, there is a relationship. When the father respects the demands of having children, that's justice. When the children respect the demands of having a father, that's their justice. Authority is set over us. Everything between us is based on relationship, and every relationship has demands. And when we respect the demands of the relationship in which we live, that's our justice. When we disregard those demands, that's our injustice. So from dignity, which manifests itself in the relational links in which we live, in which our lives are expressed, comes the idea of justice. And justice is simply an invitation to us to respect the demands of the relationship in which we live. At elections, we elect a government. And so we create a government. There is a relationship created. And that obliges us to respect the demands of this relationship. And those who are elected also become also establish a relationship. And it's also up to them to respect the demands of the relationship of the electorate. So everything that encompasses our lives on earth are based on this relationship. And they're all governed by justice, respecting the demands of the relationship in which we live. Now, when justice is the procuring the good of the dignity of each one of us, then the question that comes up is, when we try to promote the dignity of everybody, we're working for their common good. Their common good is ensuring that the dignity that they have is protected and helped to flourish. And the flourishing of the dignity of every person is the flourishing of his common being, is the flourishing of his common good. And this is a task of each one of us. It's not only a task for government, it's a task of each one of us. We need to work on making each one's dignity flourish. And to do that, there is the other principle that you call solidarity. Solidarity means you contribute, you make your contribution towards the well-being of the other person you live with. And this is not new. Aristotle, way back before Christ, formulated the principle that all members of a community or society have the responsibility of contributing to the well-being of each one in the society. And so, making a contribution towards the well-being of others in society is our sign of solidarity. We act in solidarity with them. And when in the process, somebody is weak and not able to make a contribution, then you help him to be able to make a contribution. And that is the principle of subsidiarity. You give him help. You make him, you grant him subsidy, or subsidy not the financial, but you grant him help to enable him to be able to play a role. Everybody should be solidary, contributing to the well-being of another, each one of us. But when somebody doesn't have the means to do that, then that person needs to be helped to be able to make a contribution. And helping somebody to be able to play a role in society, that's a subsidy. That's a subsidiarity, enabling the person to be able to make a contribution towards what we have. And when all of this is put together, subsidiarity becomes very crucial, because it's also a way of affirming your respect for another person's dignity. Somebody way down there, because of poverty or whatever the situation is, runs the risk of being just disregarded as somebody worth nothing. But that's also somebody with dignity. And when you grant subsidiarity, when you grant help to the person to be able to make a contribution, you have manifested your own respect for the dignity of that person. And all of this happens so that all of us can have access to the good things of creation. And this is the principle that we call the universal destination of the goods of the earth. When the good Lord created all of us, and he created and put us in a garden or created the world, it was that the idea was that all of us should support and nourish ourselves from the good things of creation. So the goods of the earth are not destined for some to the exclusion of others. There is a universal destination of the goods of the earth. All of us are destined to benefit from the good things of the earth. It's not for one to the exclusion of the other. So this is also the thing. So when we put all of this together, we have a principle that affirms the dignity of every person and affirms the fact that we live, however, in relationship with one another. And this is to promote the well-being of each one of us, our common good. And to promote the common good of each one of us, we all need to come together, contribute. In solidarity, we contribute to the well-being of each one of us. And when somebody is weak or poor enough not to be able to make a contribution, then the thing is that we should help that person, subsidiarity, to be able to make a contribution. And when we so succeed in making all of this happen, then we fashion access to the good things of the earth for each one of us. So we advance these principles and put this before any leader. For any leader, anybody who comes to exercise leadership, we say these are the things you need to understand about every human person. And you cannot exercise true leadership when you do not appreciate and understand what a human person is, his dignity, which does not come from you because you're a president or you're a head of state. It's a dignity that people are born with. Not even the United Nations grants dignity to people. Nobody does bestow dignity on people. The stuff we're born with. What states and governments do is to promote the flourishing of the dignities that we have. And when that flourishing occurs, then we have an experience of our common good. And for that, all of us contribute and we make a contribution to this. And if there should be a weak one who's not able, then the thing is that we enable that one to be also able to make a contribution. So, dear friends, these principles are principles that we place before all leaders who come and hold conversation with us about the exercise of their leadership. And we tell them, please try to understand this about a human person. You cannot exercise true leadership when you do not understand the subject that you're dealing with. And if each one has a dignity that doesn't come from you that you need to promote, then you do everything in humility to promote the dignities of people. So we started our conversation with the tragedy of the commons. It was an economic model. And therefore, the solution of it is not simply understanding the human person, but also understanding economics. And here I know I'm treading on dangerous grounds, because this is where the expert economists and all of you live. But as you also know, without having studied economics, you can still also read about it somehow. And sometimes when you read about it, you get some small ideas, stuff like that. So, from my reading about this, I describe two types of economics: political economics and civil economics. Political economics was led by Adam Smith. And that's everything that has to do with the growth and everything. Everything is mercantilized. Okay? And Adam Smith gives the story that if a beggar comes to me and he begs for something and I give it to him, that beggar is not able in the evening to meet me in the pub for a beer. But if that ex-beggar would come with a business proposal, then in the evening is likely to be able to meet me in the pub, because we're talking about contractual partners. And so for Adam Smith, there's no room for morality and the thing about brotherhood and sympathy and all of those things. Everything is contractual models that can be transacted and all. So that has to do with political economics. And against this, we come and we say, but what does economics mean? Economics, oikonomia, two Greek words put together. The management of oikos. Oikos is house in Greek. So economics is essentially the management of the resources of a household to be able to satisfy every member in the household. That's all. When you manage the resources of a household and oikos, so that every member of the household benefits from the resources, you've done economics. And you've done it very well. Therefore, economics is not simply this, the capitalist base that's about pursuit for gain and gain and gain and gain, as it were absolutizing, shares and gain. Another phase of economics, which is referred to as a civil economics, invites us to pursue economics that is people or person-based or person-centered economics. Economics that is rooted on the well-being of the human person. And such economic does not treat a human person as a commodity to enter into transaction with, but as a being with dignity to be respected as such. So, once our boss, the Pope, made a statement which Barack Obama quoted before the Senate. And he said, when the poor man dies on the street from exposure, because now well clothed and in the night he dies because of cold, it doesn't make the headlines. But let the stock exchange fall 1 or 2 points, headlines. So, where is the value? When a poor man dies on the street, it's no headlines. When the stock exchange falls 1 or 2 points, that's headlines. What does that betray? So that's our sense of values at a certain point with some of these. So that's why there's a difference between political economics type of thing of Adam Smith, which sometimes is also referred to as Robinson Crusoe economics. You know Robinson Crusoe. He was the only one on the island, so everything was about him. So as opposed to that economics, we talk about civil economics. Civil economics means consider the mutuality of individual people living together and make resources serve the well-being of all. So with all of this, I think I've exceeded my time. But all of this is simply to say that the tragedy of the commons simply invites us to consider the fact that there are forces sometimes within us which makes it difficult, which makes some very noble enterprise and stuff come to ruin, and that we need to deal with that. That's why it's so very important to recognize that a whole lot of issues have serious anthropological character. You need to understand the human person in a whole lot of issues. And when the human persons themselves are humble enough to recognize that this is what exists within them, it makes a whole lot of these things a lot easier. But when there's total and utter blindness to all of these factors within us, then we plunder from error into error, and we sink deeper and deeper and deeper into the distress and the ruin that we like to avoid. So all of us like to live in a good world, although presently we live in a world of a lot of greed. And so I am hoping that with this small conversation that I've had with you, you'll be able probably to derive some small lessons for yourselves and help us also recognize that members of the common, that's all of us. And the selfishness that can come from all of us. And the collapse of the common, that is sometimes done by all of us. But all of us also recognizing that the hubris is in all of us, are also invited to do what we can to deal with the hubris so that everything can glorify for all of us. Thank you.
Your Eminence, good morning. Concerning our water bodies, the tragedy of the commons concerning our water bodies, we know the situation concerning Galamsey in the country. Now, the public good, which is the water bodies which are being destroyed, what will be your solution that you should give advice to the president on what to do so that we don't, the tragedy doesn't befall us, because we know that it's a common good and the negative externalities of it, people might not be engaged in it, but at the end of the day, it affects all of us. So what will be your solution for it? Thank you.
No, I think so it's very simple. I think we should not be carried away by short-term gains. Okay, in every situation, sometimes we get carried away by short-term gains. And what are short-term gains? Short-term gains are, I think those in Galamsey type of people, they're looking for gold. So they're looking for wealth, they're looking for money and all of that. And what do they leave behind? You know, a whole, whatever, the environmental damages and everything that you're talking about. So you're asking me what will be my advice or whatever. My advice is simply this. We have a proverb that says, it is dada, yes, it is There's a proverb like that we make. It's better to eat every day than to eat only one day. And that's the contrast between short-term gains and long-term vision that we need to have. So yes, there's gold to be obtained in Ghana. That's why the colonial group that got here called the Gold Coast. Okay, there's a lot of gold. My own family village is from Abrodunko, near whatever, and they tell me the stories that in the past, after very heavy rainfall, you see gold washed out. So it's just that that's our endowment. But I also know from Ghana, as in the Republic of Congo, and this is said also everywhere around the world at international fora, that our endowment is also becoming our curse. In this sense that not being able to manage our endowments very well can lead to a curse for us. So what about, I'm already beginning to hear that there is a slight preference for Ivorian cocoa over Ghana cocoa, because people are beginning to say that Ghana cocoa is contaminated already by some, chemicals in the ground. So it's a question of choice. It's the data and it is the preoccupation. If we want to embrace long-term vision, let's embrace that and see how we make short-term visions flow into the long-term vision, but not pursue short-term vision to the detriment of long-term visions.
Yeah, thank you, Cardinal. In fact, I've been so impressed and touched to the core. I see a lot of philosophy displayed in your speech that is so grounded in philosophical principles, what I would describe as a return to the cave. You have returned, but I want to add with what you have just said, Edididada. If we want to listen to such talks always, please, have you considered organizing a crusade, not a crusade on the streets, by organizing a few disciples whom you will teach so that they will go to propagate these good ideas. Perhaps they could also help inculcate some of these ideas in our curricula. Perhaps these disciples would also help organize symposia. So is it possible for you to organize such a crusade? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now this is so this is my job. This is what I do every day. 2 weeks ago, on a Wednesday like this, I was standing in Milwaukee, and I was talking about social issues like this. Before that, I'd been in New Orleans. Xavier University and Loyola University, they've come together, and we're talking about the vocation of the business leader. Okay, so I do that already without giving it the label crusade. But I think I travel a lot around the world to talk about some of these issues. The thing about it is that so the Vatican or the thing is a church, but it's a church that recognizes that it's a church within humanity. And that being the case, there's also very deep and serious concern for social issues. Okay, and at a certain point we say that if you want to show how seriously you take a human person, a human being, then be interested also in his social status of life. So this is something that we do, and as I say, we don't call it crusade, but we do that. I cited America, but it's the same thing that is taking me to Namibia, it's taking me to Zambia, it's taking me to. So I guess that this time we thank the administration of this university for this invitation, but it's stuff that we do all the time. And if in the past you used to have a whole lot of students organizations, right? So let me throw the challenge to you rather. In the past, when I was in school, here secondary school, we used to have a lot of magazines. We had a New Generation. There was a magazine that was there in which young people could contribute articles, and if anybody has something to say, he would also write about it. Then on the university level, we had the Insight and Opinion. That was also a journal, high-level journal that came from Legon and this university, in which also people are. So let's revive some of those, and they will give us the forum to also express our own thoughts and thoughts like yours also in them. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We'll take 2 more questions and we are done. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Manasseh Apurum. Now, we've just been learning about greed and selfishness in the context of protecting the interest of the commons. Now, my question is it about choosing leaders who are going to put the interests of the commons first, or is an issue of having to make do with the fact that at every point in time we are going to have the interests of the commons not being properly seen to, because of the fact that the human nature is characterized by greed and selfishness, bearing in mind that these leaders we choose are not exclusive of these negative vices. So I want to know, where lies the balance? Thank you.
Okay, so we'll take the scale and put it there and see the balance. Now it is this. I think you asked a very basic question. Human beings live together. They have interests to pursue. And because of the interest that they have, so their interest as whatever to pursue, they elect a leadership to pursue that interest for them. So every election is an election that goes with a mandate. Every person elected goes with the mandate of the electorate that elected him or her. So it's like every election is your electorate entrusts you with a mandate, which is their common good. So you go pursue this for us and on our behalf. It's not. Election is not the gaining of a trophy that you go and, as it were, wave as if you have gained a trophy. It's winning the trust of your constituency to be entrusted with their mandate for their common good and for their growth. So that's what elections truly should be. But since, again, the reality is that and coming from Cape Coast, that's where I used to whatever, since the fisher, the women who sell fish during campaign for election will say, sambo, school, so give me sambo or give me something. So what happens is that we buy we sell, if you want, our mandate before somebody gets elected. Because the gift that we collect before we go to cast our vote frees the person whom we are elected to go and think about us, because he's already invested, if you want, he's already paid for the election, whatever thing you've elected him to do. And if we did not do that, if we did not require gifts and donations and money from candidates before the election, then they will be freer to worry about our common good when elected. But as it is, we've developed an election process, and not only here. I mean, presidents get elected in the United States, and they owe how many millions of people for donors and all who supported their election campaign. So we've developed this in such a way that it's no more a free conferment of mandate in an individual to pursue the common good of people. Rather, we as it were sell our mandate to them, so that when they get elected, they've won. They've already gained what they spend money for. And so the interest is not really, caring about the group. It's like, I've paid for this, so it's my gain now. So that's we need to probably rethink that procedure. And it's just that. Let's go to the original. Whatever original thing is that in election, you pick somebody you trust and confide in that person your common good or the mandate to pursue your common good. And when he goes out there, he goes there to pursue your common good. That's all. But if you require money or gift before you confer that mandate, the person goes there and says, I have paid for this already. It's now my gain. And so it doesn't work.
Good morning, Your Eminence.
Morning.
Man is a social animal, and he who is not able to fit in one is either a beast or a god, Aristotle. Now, the answer to the question, what is man, and I choose the word what and not who is man. From your description of who man is, I seem to get the idea that you are an idealist. With your engagement with leaders of industries, I'm sure one of the issues that has come up a lot is the fact that they do not preside over just sheep, but they are goats among the sheep. or for to polish it a bit, black sheep among the flock. Now, my question is, how do we deal with, from a leadership point of view, how do we deal with the black sheep in order to have that common good that we are all looking at?
So the first thing that I'd say is that it is important for the leader himself or herself to recognize what is within himself or herself. That is very important. That prescribes humility. That prescribes the so-called servant leadership that a lot of leaders talk about. That presents in a certain openness to listen and to be advised and all of that. When one recognizes one's own limitation in the exercise of any duty, that recognition doesn't diminish or reduce one's capacity to exercise leadership and rule. I've been in a position to realize a whole lot of these things. So the fact that you humble, the fact that you listen, the fact that you consult, the fact that you seek advice, these do not mean that you do not know how to lead or what you're doing. It's a necessary part of it. No human beings are omniscient. So we need to consult, we need to listen, we need to seek advice, we need all of that to help us rule. So this, I think, is what is a necessary ingredient of the exercise of leadership. Now, if there's any, as you say, if there's any black, whatever type of term, since you recognize the weakness that is within you, it makes you sympathetic towards other weaknesses out there. But when you do not recognize any weakness, then you're also not patient or tolerable with other things that you find out there. So knowing yourself and knowing what you yourself struggle with and deal with, that disposes you to respect and to be sympathetic to others with difficulty and help you deal with them.
Good morning, His Eminence. So please, mine is more of a plead and also a question. So in your speech, you describe solidarity as a contribution to the well-being of everyone in the society, and then subsidiarity being enabling someone to contribute to the society. So as an individual of this institution, I personally like the institution because of its entrepreneurial programs it has, but also yes, so I chose to be here because of the entrepreneurial programs. And my plead and also the question is, can our leaders please bring in some workshops to support the entrepreneurial courses we do individually? Because I'm a marketing student, but I'm an artist and I cook also. So can they have some workshops to help us? Thank you.
Okay. Madam, you did not ask a bad question at all. You did not make a bad observation either, because since you mentioned business and everything that you're doing, think about anybody in leadership position who delegates authority. You will not delegate, delegation of authority is already an exercise of subsidiarity. When you enable somebody, you empower somebody to be able to represent your organization to the point that you associate or you take up the decisions that that person will take. That's a real exercise of trust and confidence in that person. So delegation goes a long way to realize what we're talking about on the local level as subsidiarity. When you train an individual, expose him to the nature of your business, and you send him out to go and to represent you, and you, the CEO, are ready to associate with and assume the decisions that he or she takes and make them your own, It just means that you have full confidence in his capacity to represent your company. And for doing that, you have, as it were, delegated authority and power to him in a way that nobody can also do. So subsidiarity concretely also becomes a way of delegating offices and roles in any institution or in any enterprise.
To add to what His Eminence said, the Vice Chancellor would like me to let the young lady know that she should kindly come to his office for a discussion on this to see how they best
Praise the Lord, Your Eminence. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the wonderful discussion. As a final question, I want to ask you, what is your final advice or a word of encouragement for, you said the basic roots of the tragedy is greed. And this is the hubris that brings us all to ruin when it is not controlled. Putting leadership aside, I want you to address us from the basic, give us one word of advice to the basic individual as a family, being the basic unit of society. Men here, women here, husbands here, wives here, parents, grandchildren, grandparents. What word, what one advice can you give us so that as we go home, beyond leading in the office, leading in government, leading at the workplace, we go back home, we are men and women, husbands and wives. How can we inculcate the regard for human dignity that you talked about? Because that is what would manifest eventually, and then we start fighting for the common good. Thank you.
So you made a reference to hubris. Hubris in Greek, ancient Greek thought was this power of, if you want, a negative power or power of negativity within people who spell their ruin, and they will often relate that with also the fate, F-A-T-E, not F-A-I-T, F-A-T-E, which the gods have determined for individual. They thought this way because in ancient Greece, the thing was that any human being who excelled and became noble, whatever, at a certain point became a competitor with the gods. Okay, so the gods made ensure that people didn't get beyond certain whatever and all of that. So that was ancient Greece and all of that. Now, recognizing the nature of this assembly, whatever, since you started your thing with praise the Lord, I assume that you wanted me to talk Christian talk. I'm not sure that's what you wanted me to do. But the nature of hubris in the lives of us today is what we call sin. S-I-N. Okay? And the influence or the presence of sin in each one of us makes our actions and gestures less perfect. And when we do not recognize that and deal with it, that is capable of also leading us to a lot of ruins, like the hubris type of thing does with people. So hubris identifies the thing as selfishness. Selfishness is still known today, but we call it sin or weakness within people. So yes, that's what it is. And it is basically a simple statement that human beings, we're not perfect. But it's good to recognize that we're not perfect. And so imperfect people do not assume that they are perfect and do things which claim perfection. That is the biggest error and mistake that we can make. So with great humility, let us recognize what we are and seek what we need to improve upon and correct what we need to correct so that our gestures can be more pleasing than they've been, whether in the family, in the house, husband, wife, or whatever, all the categories that you listed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, His Eminence. I'd like to invite the Chairman of Council and the Vice Chancellor to the podium, please. We have a presentation to make to His Eminence. It says, with our greatest appreciation, His Eminence Cardinal Peter Kojo Appiah Turkson, honored guest speaker, UPSA's 4th Annual Leadership Lecture Series. The date presented by the Vice Chancellor. Thank you. Please, one final last applause for His Eminence for a wonderful lecture and presentation. Thank you. Please be seated. We are wrapping up on today's events. But before we do close, we, on behalf of by the Vice Chancellor, we will now read a poem that was written by the Dean of our law school, Professor Kofi Abuchi. And the name of the title of the poem is UPSA, a timeless tribute of faith and hope. O UPSA, O land of evergreen knowledge, fountain of cerebral industry flowing in ceaseless light. You gather a community of faith bearers who wield the torch of ambition. O UPSA, by your institute of scholarship, guide ye all who walk in thy path lit. For yours was a dream born in the sheets of limitation, within the walls of these thine humble beginnings. For in your conception was belief, belief in Ghana's transformation on the wheels of knowledge and training. As you stood firm in the sands of time, the sun has shone brighter in your later years. The new dawn has sprinkled dews of excellence on you, O UPSA, and in your preeminence, you have outpaced your peers. Be hailed in your glory as you march on unperturbed in an uncertain world, illuminating a dark world with your glow of knowledge. Thank you. I think we can all agree that we've been more than blessed by the words that His Eminence has imparted to us today. Thank you all for being here. I now invite the chaplain to give us the closing prayer.
Our Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for such an insightful lecture. We thank you for your servant, His Eminence. We pray in the name of Jesus that whatever we have received here, we will go and manifest it. We pray that, Lord, the rest of the day, you will guide us, you will protect us, you will lead us, that when everything is done, we will give you praise. We thank you in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.